A year ago, I posted a review for the first part of Wicked upon its release to theaters, and it was rather polarizing. Some people really liked my take on it, and some people seemed very upset about it. Either way, it's one of those reviews that people often revisit on my channel, even to this very day. Now, a lot of the criticism that I've gotten about the review is that people said that perhaps if I had seen the second part of Wicked, I would have had more context as what the first movie was trying to do creatively, and perhaps I'd somehow feel differently about Wicked in general if I saw them both. And seeing how these movies are so important to so many people, I figured I would go out and watch Wicked 2, also known as Wicked for Good, so that I could really absorb the full scope of what these two movies were trying to accomplish. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, both the Wicked movies, much like the Broadway play they're based on, were always facing an uphill battle when it came to winning me over as a critic. That's because their source material book is actually a Wizard of Oz fan fiction written by a heavily political author that wanted to battle the patriarchy, and while the Wicked play that would eventually appear on Broadway would tone down some of the book's more radical ideas, its foundation is still a deconstruction of a timeless classic that tries to pander to a more modern audience. Still, as a reviewer, I always give every movie a fair chance, and in spite of my reservations, I did my best to keep an open mind while watching this one. Now, before we dive in, if it's not too much trouble, please take a second to like and subscribe, as it would really help an independent movie reviewer like myself.
Do it.
Wicked for Good starts off 5 years after the event of the first Wicked movie, where Elphaba discovers that the Wizard of Oz is actually an evil patriarch that wants to do bad things to animals. And after the wizard tricks her into casting a spell on monkeys that makes them suffer, Elphaba runs away and lives in the forest, trying to fight for animal rights from afar. So basically, she's been sitting in the forest for 5 years, doing absolutely nothing and making no progress whatsoever. Meanwhile, Glinda has become something of a spokesperson for the wizard, and her boyfriend, the very moist Prince Fiyero, has become the head of the wizard's guard. But Fiyero, unbeknownst to Glinda, still has feelings for Elphaba because this movie has a stupid love triangle, which on a writing level, I've always found both lazy and annoying. Anyhow, Elphaba meets some animals in the forest and they're all running away because they don't want to stay and fight the wizard. One of the animals is of course the Cowardly Lion that we know from the real Wizard of Oz, and obviously he turns all the other animals against Elphaba because in this movie he's kind of a jerk for some reason. Meanwhile, Elphaba's sister Nessa, who's now the governor of Munchkinland, is very upset because the average-sized munchkin she's in love with wants to leave her and professes feelings for Glinda, because that's what this movie desperately needed. Another stupid love triangle. In order to keep her love interest Munchkin from leaving, Nessa then creates a new law that he isn't allowed to leave, so he ends up serving her tea and biscuits instead. And then Elphaba shows up and tries to help her sister walk by casting a spell on her slippers, the same ruby slippers that Dorothy would later wear after smushing Nessa with a house, but we'll get back to that later. Nessa then tries to use Elphaba's Book of Magic to make the average-sized munchkin fall in love with her, but she messes up the spell, and the only way Elphaba can save him is by turning him into the Tin Man that we all know from the classic real Wizard of Oz. And much like we saw with the deconstruction of the Cowardly Lion, rather than thanking Elphaba for her help in saving his life, the Tin Man ends up resenting her and acting like a jerk for some reason. And that's really the point of this movie. All the characters that you know, especially the male ones, suck. And the only good person in this whole universe is the misunderstood Wicked Witch of the West, who was always treated poorly by everybody because of the color of her skin. Anyhow, Elphaba returns to Emerald City to convince the wizard that he's also a jerk, and after she and Glinda sing a song with him, it seems like he's open to changing his ways. He even releases the flying monkeys from captivity in order to appease Elphaba, but when Elphaba discovers that the wizard still wants to harm animals, again, she turns against him. Again! At this point, Prince Fiyero turns on the wizard, and rather than capturing Elphaba, he decides to help her escape. Fiyero then tells Glinda that he doesn't want to marry her because he's secretly in love with Elphaba, and they both run off together. Glinda sees this as an act of betrayal, so she tells Michelle Yeoh that they should use Elphaba's sister Nessa as bait to capture her. Michelle Yeoh loves that idea, so she takes Dorothy's house and drops it on Nessa, killing her in the process. Now I know what you're thinking. If they were supposed to use Nessa as bait, why did Michelle Yeoh drop a house on her? her. Yeah, don't think about it. And this for me is where the movie somehow gets even worse, because from this moment, the events of Wicked for Good take place simultaneously with the events of the classic Wizard of Oz movie, changing the entire meaning of it. Remember how you thought Dorothy was doing something good and that the wizard was a well-meaning guy? Well, it turns out that he was a monster and Dorothy was just a useful idiot. And the part that bothers me the most is that the movie uses many of the same visual cues unique to the original classic movie to deceive its viewers into thinking that it's all part of the same canon. The problem is, it's not canon, and with its over-the-top political messaging, I believe that this entire concept here cheapens and vandalizes the original movie, which many consider to be an all-time classic, myself included. Anyhow, at this point of the movie, we see how brainwashed the douchey Tin Man and the Lion are into hating Elphaba, and they now only refer to her as the Wicked Witch of the West, even though she's the most wonderful person ever. And following a passionate night of, naughty activities with Prince Fiero, Elphaba senses that something bad has happened to her sister. So she goes to where Dorothy's house is dropped, and Glinda is already there waiting for her, with the wizard's evil soldiers on their way to apprehend her. Then there's a catty showdown between Elphaba and Glinda where they slap each other and talk about their feelings for Fiero, who then conveniently shows up and sacrifices his freedom to help Elphaba escape. Realizing that the guards are about to dispose of Fiero, Elphaba casts a spell from afar that could possibly save his life, and it turns out the spell worked, but with one catch. It permanently transforms Fiero into a scarecrow. Yes, the same scarecrow from the Wizard of Oz that we all know. You see, this whole time that we thought that he was working with Dorothy, he was actually a double agent, and when Dorothy thinks she's destroyed the Wicked Witch of the West, it turns out it was all a ploy, and that the Scarecrow and Witch fooled Dorothy so that they could run off together. Again! And in case that wasn't enough, Glinda then discovers that the Wizard of Oz is actually Elphaba's biological father, and while this part is left vague, the movie seems to hint that perhaps the wizard may have taken advantage of Elphaba's mother after providing her with a mysterious beverage. And using this information, Glinda extorts the wizard to fly away in a hot air balloon and never return, as we see in the original classic movie, but now we're given extra context as to why the wizard decided to leave. Glinda also frees all the animals in order to honor Elphaba, and she has the flying monkeys lock up Michelle Yeoh because she's sick of her crap, and that's generally where the movie ends. And I'm sorry to tell you that even after watching the second chapter, my sentiments towards this entire movie, along with the first one, remain pretty much the same. The Wizard of Oz is a classic, and I don't like all of this modern-day agenda-peddling nonsense. It's one thing if you put something like this on Broadway, where it appeals to women and dudes that are, fond of dudes?
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
But as I said, this movie presents itself as a legitimate prequel and sequel to the classic movie, and I am 100% against that. Maybe if during the past 8 years we hadn't seen so much heavy-handed messaging from Hollywood, I could let a movie like this slide as some type of anomaly. Unfortunately though, I think this movie is a complete disaster, and once again sends all the wrong messages in the worst possible way. This movie celebrates victimhood, while also being anti-male. I know a lot of ladies like it, and it'll probably make money at the box office, but let's not pretend this movie is anything else than what it really is. A manipulative pile of shit. Now, on a more technical level, if I had to say something good about it, I think Cynthia Erivo has a few songs and scenes in this movie where she does deliver a decent performance. Some of the directing and visuals are solid enough, but at the end of the day, it was quite a slog to get through, and I wouldn't recommend this movie to anybody. And if I had to give Wicked for Good a score where anything below a 60 is considered a failing grade, I suppose I would give this movie a 35 out of 100, which means that it's a big fail. But if you'd like to receive more reviews from an independent reviewer like myself, please consider liking and subscribing, as it would really mean a lot to me. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.